There we go. Okay. Hello, everybody. I would like to introduce Molly Gimmel. We are very fortunate to have her today, and she will be speaking at our lunch on August 15th at the NAWBO lunch. She is the co-founder and CEO of Design to Delivery and has recently written a book, Master Your Mindset, How Women Leaders Can Step Up, and she is a longtime NAWBO member. So Molly, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, and I'm really looking forward to being there next week for the luncheon in person. My company, Design to Delivery, is a government contractor, and we have a contract with the Naval Surface Warfare Center, Crane, which is about an hour and a half south of Indianapolis. So I come out to Indiana pretty regularly, not as often as I used to since before the pandemic. I used to be out like every other month, but I love going out to Indiana and coming to the NAWBO-Indy events when it can work with my travel schedule. So I'm really excited to be there.
So Did you say where you're from?
I'm from the DC area. I'm in the DC chapter, and I live in Northern Virginia, just outside Washington, DC.
All right.
So I don't know if you know, I am a former national board chair of NAWBO. I spent 6 years on the national board from 2014 to 2020. And I rolled off the board in 2020, right as the pandemic was starting. And all of a sudden, I had so much free time, not just no longer being on the board, which took up a whole lot of time, but then not being able to go out and do stuff. And so I decided to use my free time and have my pandemic project was to write a book. And so what I decided to do was, based on my time on the national board, one of the things that I had gotten really interested in was what makes a chapter successful. Because I'm sure for those of you who have been around for a while, you've seen that sometimes there'll be a situation where there'll be chapters that are growing and thriving and doing great things, and other ones that are really struggling. And then if you look a few years later, it's the reverse. The one that was growing and thriving is now struggling, and the one that was struggling is now growing and thriving. And when you look at why those things are happening, it's almost always leadership. And so when a chapter has strong leadership, strong president and strong board members, then the chapter grows and thrives, and the members get engaged, and it's just a great situation. But sometimes, unfortunately, that's not the case. And when that happens, when the chapter board members and the chapter president aren't strong leaders, then the chapter struggles and the members start going away. And so I decided to write a book about what makes a strong leader. And so what I did was yeah, right, Amanda. I made a list of characteristics that I think were important for someone to try to improve upon in order to be a more effective leader. And I came up with about 24 different characteristics. And I think that's what's really difficult about leadership, is that there's not just one thing that you need to do in order to be an effective leader. There's multiple things, and they all kind of work together. And so, like I said, I made a list of like 24 different characteristics, and I divided them into two groups. The first group being mindsets, meaning what's happening in your head. And then the second group is skills or actions, things that you can learn. And so the book that I wrote ended up being the mindset book. So it's called Master Your Mindset, How Women Leaders Step Up. And then I'm currently working on book 2, which will be about the skills. And so anyone who comes to the luncheon next week will get a copy of this. They have been shipped. Leanne, you should be getting them sometime soon. We have copies for everybody. And we'll be talking about the different mindsets that that are important for leaders to master in order to be more effective in their roles. So when I say mindset, I think, what I'm talking about are things like confidence, integrity, empathy, approachability, authenticity. Those are all examples of mindsets. Whereas skills are things like communication, team building, collaboration, things like that. So you can see kind of the difference. So the mindsets are what's happening in your head. And there's 13 mindsets in the book that I talk about. And so I'm not sure, Jamise is going to be, we're going to be doing a fireside chat kind of situation next week. So I'm not sure which ones she's going to want to talk about, but I'm happy to talk about any. And I think there is time for Q&A. So if you guys have any questions about any of the mindsets, I'm happy to talk about them. So yeah, or if anyone wants to ask about any of them now, I'm happy to chat about them. So that's pretty much what the situation is. Leanne.
Hey, okay. And yes, those books are on the way. I saw them this morning. So so haven't gotten a confirmed shipping date yet, but that'll probably happen sometime this week. But you interviewed several women.
Yes.
Can you give that quick background on that?
Sure. So when I decided to write the book, like I said, I made the list of attributes, divided them into mindsets and skills. And then I interviewed about 30 different women leaders in a variety of different industries. And I gave them the list and I said, pick 2 or 3 in each category, mindsets and skills, and let's just talk about them. You can share any stories that you want to share about something that happened related to that mindset, or if you just want to talk about the mindset and how it's been important to you in your leadership journey. And so as I wrote the book, I kept a list of who talked about what. So for example, with one of the mindsets, integrity. So I had a list of 7 different people that I interviewed who talked about integrity. I would go to the transcripts of those and then pull in the stories that they told me or the discussion that we had about that topic as I wrote the book. So each chapter is kind of a story of mine related to that mindset, a discussion of what the mindset is and why it's important, and then the stories that were told to me by the different women that I interviewed. And many of them were NAWBO leaders at the national level or in different chapters. From Indy, Trissetta Briggs, who I'm sure you all know, was one of the women that I interviewed. So she's her stories and her commentary are included throughout several of the chapters in the book.
Okay, so I'm going to ask a few more.
Okay.
So did you get any? Okay, so you
Okay.
You got one in there.
Regina,
so
do you think, let me pull up the chat real quick. I saw that a little button popped up, but I didn't get to read the whole question. What do you think leaders struggle with most when it comes to your list of mindset? And if we're unsure of where to start, what would you say is the most important mindset topics to tackle? The 2 that I think that leaders struggle with most are, and interestingly, they're chapters 1 and 2 in the book because I think they're the most important. The first one is mastering your mental chatter. So getting that voice in your head, that Debbie Downer, negative Nancy, whatever you want to call it, voice who's always criticizing you, getting it to stop doing that and to start being your fan and not your critic. I know that so many people struggle with that. Because that voice in your head, it's programmed to remember the negative things that it's heard people say about you in the past, in your entire life, and repeat them over and over and over again. And so being able to reprogram that voice in your head is so important. It's hard. It's not something you can just flip a switch. But it's really, really important in order, I think, to be an effective leader. And the number one reason for that is because chapter 2, confidence. Because having that voice in your head telling you negative things about you really saps your confidence. But confidence is the number one characteristic that people look to in a leader. If you are in a leadership role and you have no confidence in yourself in being effective and good at that leadership, then no one's going to want to follow you. No one's going to trust that you know what you're talking about or that you have the best interest of the organization and them as a follower, that you have their best interest at heart. So those are the 2 main things. Imposter syndrome, I see someone put in the chat, imposter syndrome. Yes, imposter syndrome is a huge confidence killer. And so that's talked about in the chapter about confidence and some strategies to defeat imposter syndrome. It's funny, imposter syndrome, I just was reading an article about imposter syndrome, speaking of, and they were saying that traditionally people have thought that women suffer from imposter syndrome more than men, but the fact of the matter is it's equal. Men just don't talk about it. So, yeah. Let's see, anything else in the chat? Mental chatter, so true. Yeah. Okay. If you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat or just unmute yourself and ask. I'm happy to chat about any of these topics. Leanne, did you have a question? Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead, Shonda.
Hey, this is Shonda. You just mentioned that imposter syndrome is in men too. And obviously, you know, we talk about it a lot, but I'm curious if there's any additional information that you might have about why men don't talk about it or why it's not recognized in men as much as it is in women.
Because I think men don't talk about their feelings the way women do. Men, especially in a professional environment, men feel like they have to portray strength at all times, and they're afraid to. They think if they portray any kind of weakness or talk about any kind of weakness, that it will be detrimental to their career, and so they don't.
I also feel like they are less of a man expressing vulnerability to show that they have internal.
Right.
Mental health in men is an ongoing struggle for our nation. And
yeah.
They're held to such a standard that they have a hard time meeting it.
Well, the thing about it is that they held themselves to that standard. They hold themselves to that standard where, in fact, I truly believe that if a man, anybody, man, woman, showing vulnerability, admitting that you're not perfect, is actually gives you a stronger followers. The people, when they see that you're a human being and that you're not perfect, it makes them feel more connected to you as a leader, and it actually strengthens your leadership. And I think men are starting to realize that, but there's still a ways to go.
Hi, this is Patty Parker. Interestingly enough, the first time I saw anything on imposter syndrome, it was by a book of Carl Richards. And what he pointed out was presidents of the United States, they studied them. The first day in office, they get into the Oval Office, they shut the door and they sit there and go, oh my gosh, what am I doing now? If everybody really knew me, they wouldn't have let. So that's actually where imposter syndrome started, was not just male executive, but presidents of the United States. That's where the whole thing of imposter syndrome started. Carl Richardson has some really, really interesting thoughts on the topic.
I'm sure. The first actual book about it was written, let's see. I think I have, in the back of the book, I have a list of other books about the same topics, but I didn't include that one in there. But yes, the first book about it was written by a woman, and it was in the, I think, late 80s, early 90s. And she attributed it mostly to women. But
interesting. So much for the guys to jump on it and call it their own, right?
Right. But what's interesting about imposter syndrome too, and this was mentioned in Adam Grant's latest book. I don't know if you all are familiar with Adam Grant. He is a professor at the Wharton School of Business, and he writes a lot of books about some of these types of topics. And in his latest book, he talked about, I think it was called Originals. That's one of his books. I don't know if that's the one. He talks about studies that show, for example, in med school, that med students that have imposter syndrome actually score better in terms of almost everything that they're measured on, in terms of patient interaction, accuracy of diagnosis, because the medical students who think that they're all that and they don't have imposter syndrome, they rush to the diagnosis and they don't really take the patient's concerns into consideration, where the ones who do have imposter syndrome are much more careful because they want to make sure they're getting it right. So they take the time to actually talk to the patients and about their bedside manner. That's the word I was looking for. They talk to the patients and they make sure that they understand what they're going through, and they actually make much better diagnoses and treatment plans, and the patients rate them much higher on bedside manner. That's the ones that do have imposter syndrome. So there's nothing wrong with having imposter syndrome, really. I recently had a situation personally with imposter syndrome. I was asked a couple years ago, after my time on the NAWBO National Board, to serve as a delegate for the United States on the W20. And so you've maybe heard of the G20, which is the organization of the 20 largest countries in the world. Well, the G20 has about a dozen different working groups that make recommendations, policy recommendations to the ministers of the G20, and the W20 is one of them, and that stands for Women 20. So the W20 is representatives from each of the 20 countries who are making policy recommendations on that topic. So I was asked to join the W20 as a delegate for the US. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, I had some serious imposter syndrome there. Like, who am I to represent our country? And specifically on the topic of entrepreneurship, based on my experience with NAWBO. That's why they wanted me, because that's one of the main topics that they talk about in terms of policy recommendations to help support women, is making recommendations supporting the establishment of better regulations and business environments for women entrepreneurs around the world. So yeah, I had some serious imposter syndrome, because I was like, who am I to do that? Yeah, I mean, I know I was NAWBO national chair and all that, but still, this is the country we're talking about. And so I finally got over it after I had attended a few meetings, and I was like, well, none of these other women are really any smarter than I am. And the woman who asked me to be on it, I trust her. She's been a mentor for years, and I trust her judgment. And if I figured if she thought I was qualified, then I must be. So, yeah. Okay, there's a question in the chat. Was there anything surprising or startling in my research? I think the only thing that was the thing that was most surprising was in the interviews that I gave. Some of the women that I interviewed were really very accomplished, very successful in their industries or in their careers, and the vulnerability that they showed in terms of the stories of times that they had imposter syndromes, or times that they had screwed something up royally, or things along those lines. That was most surprising to me, I think. Yeah. Shonda, can you give us a glimpse at the topic, the attitude a female leader needs to take? So that's in the blurb on the back of the book. So the attitudes is just another word for mindsets. So when the publisher I worked with, when they kind of wrote that, they wanted to kind of redefine mindset so people understood. I don't know that attitude is definitely a synonym of mindset, but it's kind of similar. So that's what that phrase means. The mindsets that the female leader needs to work on in order to be more effective. That makes sense? Okay, any other questions? Leanne, you got anything else?
No, the one was, did you find anything interesting, was one of the ones I was going to ask. So no, that was, no, you looking forward to hearing more next week.
Molly.
Hopefully everybody is registered.
Great. Yep, Patty.
So I've got some books in outline form that I've been procrastinating, adding to, not perfect enough, blah, blah, blah. So could you give a little insight to other people who would like to share their mindsets or whatever in book form? What got you going? What was your best tools?
Oh, you mean like the writing process?
Yeah, just the writing process itself.
Sure. So in terms of the writing process, what I did was, like I said, I started by making that list of all the different attributes that I thought I should address in terms of the different things that needed to be, that people need to work on in order to be more effective as a leader. I divided them into two groups, the mindsets and then the skills. And And then I did all the interviews, and I did them on Zoom so that I would have the transcripts. So I could record them. So I didn't have to be taking notes. So I could record them. And then I used some online app to send me the transcript. And then for each chapter, I kind of decided on a format for the chapter. So each chapter format was open with a story, preferably my own story. But if I didn't have a good one, then maybe one of the stories that one of the women told me that I interviewed, and then talk about that attribute, that mindset, and then why it's important, and then weave in the descriptions or the stories and or the thoughts that the people I interviewed had. So I worked on it just one chapter at a time. This was before AI. If I was doing it again, I would probably use AI more to talk about, to help me write not obviously the quotes that people provided, but to write the description of what that mindset was and why it's important. I would probably have used that a little bit more, and I'm currently using that a little bit more on the skills book. And then once I had all of the chapters done, I kind of tried to figure out what order to put them in, and come up with a framework for that. And so the order that I put them in was based on the overarching theme of connection. Because I think overall, in order for a leader to be successful, the people who are following them need to feel a connection. But also you need to be able to feel a connection to yourself. So the first group are the connection to yourself, which is like the confidence and the mental chatter and the integrity. And then the second group was how you connect to others. And that's the mindsets that you have when you're connecting to others. And those are things like approachability and authenticity and empathy. So like I said, I just worked one chapter at a time and tried to get that all done. And then once it was done, I was working with an editor. So I sent it off to the editor, and they came back with a bunch of comments and suggestions. And so I made those things. But the one tool I will tell you that really, really helped me, because I really struggled with this, even though it was the pandemic and I was home alone and didn't have anything else going on, I still kind of struggled to write it. But a friend of mine suggested this thing called Shut Up and Write, which is a meetup group. And they have them all over the country and online. So if you're familiar with meetup.com, you can go on there and join one or many of the meetup groups, the Shut Up and Write groups. And what they do is when it's time for the meeting, you log on, and it's a Zoom like this, or not on Teams, but it was a Zoom. And everybody introduces themselves and talks about what project they're working on, what they're writing. And then you mute yourself, and everybody goes and writes. And it's not interactive. You're just doing it. But for some reason, having that group of faces on the screen in front of me as I was trying to write really helped me. It really got me to do it. So I would try to schedule 2 or 3 sessions a week. And I joined like half a dozen different Shut Up and Write groups, because they would all have them at different times of day, different days of the week. And so that way I could pick ones that worked best for my schedule. So I signed up for those, and that really is what the biggest tool was that got me to crank it out. So yeah, hope that's helpful. Oh, okay. Aaron didn't have a question. Anybody else have any? Oh, Janice, hi.
Hey, Molly, how are you? Thank
great.
you
How
for
are you?
doing this. I'm really excited. And this will help me too, because you and I will be having a chat at the event on the 15th. So I guess, and I've read the whole book like 3 times. I'm on my 3rd time, every time I find something new. But one of the things is you mentioned the skills book, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I was just wondering, because one of the giveaways we're going to have at the event on the 15th is a copy of your next book. So can you give us a sneak peek at how that one will be structured, or what the skills are? Is it connected to the first group? Like, what can you tell us about book number 2?
So book number 2 will be structured in the same way. Each chapter will be a different skill, and So I think I explained this before you jumped on, but when I first started this, I just came up with a big list of all of the attributes that I think are important for people to work on to be more effective leaders. And then I divided them into 2 groups, being mindsets being group 1, and then skills being group 2. And so the skills in book 2 are communication, public speaking, negotiation, team building, growing other leaders. I don't have the list in front of me. Let me, I can pull it up. Sorry, you're muted.
That's okay, but that's a great start to thinking about what's next, because one of the things we'll ask people to do at the event is to decide their action, right? What are they going to do as a result of being there on the 15th? So that's a great start. And then I wanted to just say, I think it was Beth that put in the chat that we have people in our chapter, members of our chapter who are authors. That's another great thing about being NAWBO, wherever you are NAWBO, is that there are always other NAWBO people. We need to use that directory and do some searching and find other people. Maybe we start our own Shut Up and Write group, right?
Yeah,
That's what I was going to say. Yes, yes. So you just
and now that the pandemic's over, there's Shut Up and Write groups that meet in person. Like there's where I live, there's one that meets every Sunday morning at a coffee shop for 2 hours, and they all just bring their laptops and sit there, and it's at 7 o'clock in Sunday morning. I'm just not going to go to that. So I stick with the online ones. Sorry.
I have a question. So I'm new to the Indy NAWBO group. I'm a transplant from the Orange County NAWBO group, but I would love to learn what is, for the new people like myself, what would be the best way to find other people who are either authors or aspiring authors or other subject matter groups that say, hey, NAWBO people, let's get together. I want to talk about XYZ, or tap your brain, or I have something to share. So any suggestions for us new kids?
Well, I'm not a member of your chapter, so I don't know what your chapter's resources are in that area. I'll let Jamise
well, Shonda's on here. I don't want to step on her membership chair toes, so I'll let her do that.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, great question, Patricia. And nice to meet you. We're happy to have you here joining us in Indy. We do lots of different events, and so we are always planning different things, different topics, whether it be social or events like this that kind of tie into a luncheon or a program that we're going to have. We don't currently have any like Shut Up and Write type of groups, but it is something that we are considering. And so membership is actively seeking out membership committee volunteers to allow us.
Yay! I talked to Leanne Richardson about this. It's like I was on the member committee in Orange County, so now it's time to drive it over here.
Fantastic, because that's actually one of the roles that we would like to add, is someone who can come alongside of those of us who are already on the committee and work with us to create some of those specific groupings to bring together like-minded who are, whether it's social or professional or whatever it may be. And so these Connect calls are every Monday. We do topics like this. We feature our members. This is one way we highlight some of our members. We'll do certain programmings on here to cover certain topics. And then we do break every once in a while from that to just have a social conversation. Hey, what's going on in your life right now? Is there something you're struggling with? Do you have something to celebrate? Just general conversation between whoever's on the call. So we do have those social calls on here as well. I'll reach out to you with some details about membership, and we'll connect on that, and we'll go from there.
Let me just add right away, there are at least 2 of our social media platforms that will probably fit that kind of reach out. LinkedIn and Facebook, we have our private groups that you could say, hey, I want to shut up and write. Who else wants to shut up and write? And so you could pick up people in there as well. I've got a 1 o'clock, so I have to hop off. But thank you, everyone, for showing up. Can't wait to see you, Molly. Safe travels.
Thank you. Looking forward to, I've got a 1 o'clock too, so I've got to hop off too, but great to see you all. I'm really looking forward to seeing you in person next week.
We can't wait, Molly. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Yeah. It is 102. And I did put in the chat, we actually have a member that is a publisher. So if you're writing a book and you need some
Yeah.
guidance or you want to get it published, then Denola Burton owns a publishing company. And
Could you
so
spell her first name?
Denola? Yeah.
It's in
I'm
the
sorry.
chat.
Yeah, I put it in the chat.
Oh, awesome. Thank you.
And Shonda, Patty's who I want you to talk to about doing the member meetup. Didn't I connect you guys on email?
We talked about it, but we didn't ever connect via email. So I'll do that right now. I was actually jumping in the directory to look her up. So
Okay. Hey,
I'll
I plan
do it.
on being at the August luncheon, so we can connect in person there if you like.
perfect.
And if you're not signed up for the luncheon, they still can, right, Leanne?
Absolutely.
And you can hear Molly and in
Get a
person.
book.
You
Yep,
get a
and
book.
get a copy.
So question, I've got some potential members. I can bring them with to the August 15th luncheon. Yes?
Yeah, just need to register them.
Okay. Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll see everybody next Monday. Is there anything before then, Shonda?
Just the luncheon. And then we have a social event coming up on August 27th. So that's going to be in Shelbyville at Capone's downtown. That's a free event. It's going to be super fun. So that's out there on our LinkedIn, our Facebook. And so there's a registration link out there as well. So we're trying to gauge because we are going to have food available. So we're trying to gauge how many people will be there. So we've got our luncheon on the 15th, Connect calls on Mondays, and then our membership Connect Live event in Shelbyville on the 27th from 5 to 7.
Leanne, did you have something?
Nope. No, I've got to
Okay.
fly.
Okay. All
Gotta
right.
fly.
Okay.
Sorry.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everybody.